At some point in your life, a teacher stood in front of a classroom and told you something that was completely wrong, not because they were lying, because they'd been told the same thing by someone who'd been told the same thing by someone else. And somewhere at the beginning of that chain was a novelist, a propagandist, or a person who just needed a simpler story than the truth. You memorized it, you repeated it on tests, and it's been sitting in your head ever since, unchallenged, filed under facts. Today that changes. These are history's biggest lies you were taught in school. Let's get into it. Columbus proved the Earth was round. There's something deeply satisfying about the Columbus story as it gets taught. One brave man against a world full of flat Earth believers, sailing west while everyone else cowered at the edge. It's a perfect story. It's also almost entirely fiction. Educated people had known the Earth was spherical since ancient Greece. The mathematician Eratosthenes calculated its circumference with remarkable accuracy around 240 BC. Medieval scholars, sailors, and clergy all accepted a round Earth as settled fact. The debate Columbus actually had with Spanish scholars wasn't about the shape of the Earth. It was about the size. His critics thought he'd underestimated the distance to Asia, and they were right. He survived only because an unknown continent happened to be in the way. The flat Earth myth was largely invented by Washington Irving in an 1828 fictional biography that blurred the line between fact and storytelling so completely that generations of educators never questioned it. The story was too good to check. It still is. And if one novelist could rewrite the legacy of Columbus, imagine what happens when the myth involves someone even more sacred. George Washington had wooden teeth. The founding father mythology requires Washington to be larger than life in every detail, and somehow that extended to his mouth. Wooden teeth fit the image of a man carved from something harder than ordinary people. The reality is stranger and more human than that. Washington had lost nearly all of his teeth by the time he took office. The dentures he wore were constructed from human teeth, animal teeth, hippopotamus ivory, and metal wire. They fit poorly, distorted the shape of his mouth, and caused him constant discomfort. Several portraits show the tension in his jaw from trying to keep them in place, but he never had any wooden teeth. The wooden teeth story likely spread because ivory dentures yellowed and stained over time in ways that could resemble wood grain, and nobody looked closely enough to correct it. People preferred the legend of a man made of timber to the reality of a president in pain. The myths we build around our heroes always say more about what we need them to be than about who they actually were. Humans and dinosaurs never coexisted. This one gets taught with a clean timeline. Dinosaurs here, extinction event, 66 million years of nothing, then eventually humans. It's tidy and it's incomplete. Birds are dinosaurs. Not descended from dinosaurs, not related to dinosaurs. They are dinosaurs, the direct living descendants of theropod dinosaurs, the same branch that included Velociraptor and Tyrannosaurus rex. Every time you've watched a bird land on a fence or heard one outside a window in the morning, you've been in the presence of a living dinosaur. Beyond that, crocodilians, the family that includes modern crocodiles and alligators, are archosaurs, the broader group dinosaurs belong to, and they've coexisted with humans for as long as humans have existed. The clean break between the age of dinosaurs and the age of humans was always a simplification built for a curriculum, not a reflection of how messy and overlapping the actual history of life on this planet has always been. Napoleon was only exiled once. Napoleon is one of those historical figures whose story feels complete. Rise, conquest, defeat, exile, end. The textbook gives you a clean arc. What it quietly removes is the part where he escaped, came back, and had to be stopped all over again. After his first defeat in 1814, Napoleon was exiled to the island of Elba, off the coast of Italy. He kept his imperial title and was allowed a personal guard of several hundred soldiers. The people who arranged this apparently believed a man who'd conquered most of Europe would be satisfied governing a small Mediterranean island. Less than 10 months later, he escaped, sailed back to France, and retook power without firing a single shot. Troops sent to stop him switched sides on the road and joined his march to Paris instead. He ruled again for 100 days before his final defeat at Waterloo. The second exile sent him to St. Helena, a remote island in the South Atlantic with no nearby landmass and a permanent British garrison. He didn't escape that one. The first exile wasn't a failure of Napoleon. It was a failure of imagination by the people who designed it. History edited that embarrassment out of the standard lesson. King Tut was a powerful pharaoh. If a name survives 3,000 years and ends up on the cover of every ancient history textbook, the person behind it must have done something extraordinary. That's the instinct, and it's wrong. King Tut took the throne at around 8 or 9 years old and died at roughly 19. His reign lasted less than a decade and left no major military victories, architectural monuments, or significant policy changes behind. By the standards of Egyptian history, he was a minor figure who accomplished little and died young. What makes his modern fame stranger is that he was nearly erased from history entirely. Subsequent pharaohs removed his name from official records to distance themselves from the religious controversies of his father. For thousands of years, he was essentially forgotten. His tomb survived intact only because it was buried under debris from a later construction project and wasn't discovered until Howard Carter found it in 1922. The treasures inside generated global headlines and launched an obsession that's never faded. His fame is an accident of preservation. The things that survive aren't always the most important things. They're just the things that happen to be buried in the right place. Paul Revere shouted, "The British are coming." Longfellow's 1861 poem turned Paul Revere into one of the most recognizable figures in American history. The ride is heroic. The warning has been repeated so many times it feels carved into the foundation of the country. Almost none of the details are accurate. The phrase itself would have been nonsensical at the time. The colonists considered themselves British. Shouting that the British were coming would have told no one anything useful. What Revere actually warned was that the regulars were coming, meaning the British Army troops specifically. Beyond that, Revere didn't ride alone. He was accompanied by William Dawes, who set out on a different route the same night. A third rider named Samuel Prescott joined them along the way. Revere was captured by a British patrol before completing the ride. Prescott was the one who actually reached Concord with the warning. Longfellow chose Revere because his name fit the meter of the poem. That's the entire reason. And that's enough to erase two people from a story they were essential to. Pirates buried treasure, the map, the X, the chest of gold on a remote island. The buried treasure myth is so deeply embedded in the idea of piracy that removing it feels like it should collapse the whole image. It doesn't, because the image was fiction to begin with. Pirates needed to spend money to operate. Ships required constant maintenance, crews demanded payment, and supplies had to be purchased at port. Burying treasure and leaving it in the ground was financially counterproductive. The whole point of piracy was to acquire wealth and use it, not preserve it for a future that might never come. The buried treasure myth traces almost entirely to Robert Louis Stevenson's 1883 novel, Treasure Island, which invented the map, the X, and the buried chest as narrative devices. There's one documented historical case of a pirate, Captain Kidd, burying a small cache of treasure briefly before his arrest. One case across the entire golden age of piracy became the template for everything. Fiction doesn't just entertain, it replaces reality when the real version is less interesting, and it holds that position long after anyone remembers where the story came from. The Wright brothers were the first to fly. The Wright brothers achieved something genuinely historic at Kitty Hawk on December 17, 1903. The dispute isn't about whether what they did mattered, it's about the word first and what that word was quietly defined to mean after the fact. Other forms of manned flight had already happened. Hot air balloons had been carrying passengers since 1783. Glider flights were well documented through the late 1800s. A Brazilian inventor named Alberto Santos Dumont made a widely witnessed powered flight in Paris in 1906 and argued his design was more practical because it could take off without a launching rail. He's considered the father of aviation in much of South America and Europe to this day. The Wright brothers are credited with the first controlled, powered, sustained, heavier-than-air flight. That qualifier matters. It's also a definition that was shaped partly after the fact to draw a line that placed them first. History's full of moments where the person who got the credit was the one whose country had the better publicists. And speaking of credit going to the wrong person entirely, the last entry on this list isn't about a person or a place. It's about a painting and how an entire culture decided something was priceless. The Mona Lisa was always famous. Walk into the Louvre today and you'll find crowds pressing toward a single painting behind bulletproof glass. Most of them will be surprised by how small it is. All of them have been told, directly or indirectly, that this is the most important artwork in the world. For most of its existence, it wasn't. Leonardo da Vinci painted it in the early 1500s, and for roughly 4 centuries it was respected but not particularly celebrated. It hung in various French royal residences and eventually the Louvre, without generating exceptional attention. Art critics acknowledged it but didn't place it above dozens of other Renaissance works. In 1911, a Louvre employee named Vincenzo Perugia walked out with the painting hidden under his coat. The 2-year search that followed generated more international news coverage than the painting had received in 4 centuries combined. The absence of it made people realize or decide that it mattered enormously. When it was recovered in 1913, the Mona Lisa had become a symbol, and symbols don't go back to being ordinary. Its fame wasn't built from the painting outward, It was built from a news cycle inward and then confirmed by every crowd that stood in front of it afterward, each one making the next crowd larger. Every myth on this list survived for the same reason. Simple beats complicated, heroes beat committees, and a clean story beats the truth every time. The people who taught you these things weren't lying. They were passing on the version they'd been given. And if you enjoyed this, there's another video on this channel full of things you've believed your whole life that are completely false. It's on screen right now.